Hi there, Sean McGeever, and I'm here way late to do a talk Tuesday. It's definitely not Tuesday, it's Sunday. It's been a long week. So here we go. I'm going to jump in right away without any further ado and talk about Matthew 6, how you might be able to approach looking at Matthew 6 for a club talk. So Matthew 6 fits within the famous Sermon on the Mount. So that's Matthew 5 through 7. And it might be natural to think, how does the Sermon on the Mount, how does Matthew 6 fit in a club talk? I haven't heard too many club talks on Matthew 6. I haven't heard too many club talks on the Sermon on the Mount. And I think it's really important for us to stop and think about that. What is it about Matthew that he thought that this was an essential part about explaining his gospel? And if this section of scripture fits Matthew's gospel, I think it forces us to really wrestle with, how does this fit the gospel that I'm going to proclaim? And maybe to kind of bring it a little bit home a little closer, if this was good enough for Matthew to include in his gospel, how can we include this in the gospel that we preach in Young Life, in Young Lives, in Wyldlife, in College Life, in Capernaum, and all of that? And wrestling. It might not be easy, but I think if you just dwell on it for a bit, it might be something you hadn't thought about and show a different angle. I'd encourage you to kind of put your neck out there and try to give this a shot, even if it seems a little overwhelming. Now, in Matthew 6, it talks about 5 different things. The first section is made up of 3 things. It says, it assumes that you're going to do these 3 things. It says, when you give money, when you pray, and when you fast. So there's when you do these kind of religious activities, Jesus has some instructions for us. Then the next part is about talking about treasure in heaven and anxiousness. Now, all 5 of these could be fantastic topics to cover in campaigners. You could go through them really slowly. I think you could learn a lot. But when it comes to giving a club talk, in fact, I'm talking tomorrow night at our club. I'm going to use the section on prayer. So hopefully I can give you a little bit of an idea about how I'm planning on doing that. I hope it goes well. I guess I should pray about that. But first off, it says when you pray. So my first point is kind of the outline is being honest. We all pray. The second point is made up of 2 parts about kind of hypocrite skills, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the hypocrite skill number 1 is look at me. And we're all tempted to do that. The hypocrite skill number 2 is listen to me. And we're all tempted to do that in a lot of ways. Then there's 2 authenticity skills. One is just to be who you are when you're alone. Just be yourself. Pretend like as if no one else is around, whoever that is. That's probably a good snapshot of who you really are. And then the other one is just to use your own words. God knows your real voice. You don't need to try to sound fancy. If you're used to talking or communicating, use that. Just be authentic with God. When it comes to the actual prayer, the Lord's Prayer, verses 9 through 13, I just have it broken down kind of like in Young Life slang, and so I apologize if it's a little too lax, but God is great and perfect. God, please change our world. God, provide for what we really need. God, please forgive our mistakes, and God, please help us stay on the right track. And whether someone in your club is really loves Jesus and is wanting to grow, or if they're the furthest thing away from that, I bet a lot of us are saying, help me stay on the right track, help me to be forgiven, help me get what I really need, provide for me what I need, change this world, and hopefully one day they would say, God, you are great. I want to recognize who you are. So a couple main points, here are 2. God knows everything about you. You don't need to impress God. You don't need to put on a show with your actions, where you stand, with your words. God just wants us to talk to Him. Talking to God is normal, and you can do it now. No performance needed. The second point, a possible main point, could be imagine, if you can, a world that was 100% the way that Jesus wanted it. So in the prayer it says, your kingdom come, your will be done. Imagine a world where all these things were true, where people were able to stay on the right track and temptation wasn't an issue. A place where forgiveness was like completely happening with people and they're living in harmony. A place where everyone's needs were provided for. There wasn't maybe just kind of this unjust system where lots of people have lots of stuff and others don't. Imagine if our request for God to change the world and make it be the way He wanted it to be actually came to fruition. Like, imagine that. Now, that kind of sounds like a imagine world peace kind of like thing, but this is actually the thing that God wants to have happen now. Like, He wants to do that now through you and through me as we listen to who Jesus is about. And so that could be a main point. Here are a couple things that this passage shows us about Jesus. One is Jesus is God, and we've been talking about that Young Life. Jesus is God, and being such, He is able to hear our prayers, even when we're alone. A second point is that a room with a closed and even locked door gives us as much access to God as the very front row seat at any church or any famous sanctuary in the world. You don't have to be anywhere special. You don't have to be at Young Life. You don't have to be at church. You don't have to be at any place at all. Though those places are great and can help us a lot, God is able to be with you and be in relationship with you even when you're alone. God is accessible. Another thing is that God sees us just for who we are, and also God hears us just as we are. Now, one more thing about this shows us about who God is, about who Jesus is. God is able to change the world. God is able to provide what we really need. God is able to forgive us, and God is able to help us stay on track. He is able to do that. All those things. Now, kind of bringing it home, what does this have to do with our life? I think it would be good kind of with that first point, just it says when you pray, you could just challenge everyone and say, look, we all pray. Some of you call it prayer, some of you don't call it prayer, but we all ask for help in different ways. And so just being honest about that, anytime you ask for help, effectively you're praying. You're asking someone who has resources that are greater than yours to be able to step in and help you. I have a link in my little handout that I have if you end up getting this, but the latest Pew Research poll shows that 55% of Americans pray every single day. And chances are, maybe over the course of a week or a month or a year, everyone reaches out and says, God, and perhaps even specifically Jesus, would you help us? So let's just be honest. We all ask for help in a bunch of different ways. No one is actually 100% self-sufficient. You can look through history and see people who are saying, there are instances of people say, just drop me off at that deserted island. I'll take care of myself. I'm kind of done. I'm self-sufficient. That hasn't worked at all for anyone. We are designed to be needy. We all need help from someone, from other people, and from God. Another thing that this has to do with our life is that we all want this. We all want our world to change. We want our daily needs to be met. We want forgiveness. We want help. We aren't healthy when these things aren't in place. And so being such, we were designed to be needy on purpose. As much as we might try to kind of like make our world fit perfectly, it will never be that way. God has designed, I guess you could kind of call it a flaw in the system where we will be needy. We are designed to be needy, where we cannot provide for our own needs. And that design, that flaw in the system of life as we know it is an invitation to ask God for help. So don't be surprised when maybe you're feeling guilty because you need forgiveness, or you don't have what you need, or you keep getting tempted with all sorts of things, or just any of those things. What those are actually invitations into a relationship from God. Now, there's a whole bunch of technical details in here, so I'm going to try to go quick, but perhaps maybe the most interesting one, and one that I'm going to use actually in the illustration part in a second here, is the word hypocrites. The word hypocrite is actually a Greek word that can mean a bunch of things, but one thing that it means is that it draws upon the Greek tradition of like acting and the theatrical tradition. So this word, to be a hypocrite, is actually a technical word to be a Greek theatrical actor. And being such, it means to be insincere and kind of like acting the part of someone who you really aren't. It's an actor who tries to impress others with their show. And so I think I'm going to mention that in a second here, but that's what a hypocrite technically is. It's an actor trying to play the part of someone who they aren't. Another word in here, in verse 6, when it says, go into your room and shut the door, that word there, room, is a bit of a technical word, and it means to go into, it would have been the smallest room in a Galilean or Palestinian home. It would have been the smallest room in there. It would have been the storehouse. It would have been where a family kept their food and their valuables. It would have been the only room in a house that would have had a lock on it. And being such, it was really small and had their valuables in there. And so that would have been, we don't really have too many things like that, but just think of small with a lock. It could be like a broom closet or like a coat closet in your house. Really a place where you kind of could be alone and intimate. There's a couple other words in here. It says empty phrases in verse 7. Technically, this is like equivalent to our word like babbling. So empty phrases, like you just saying stuff that doesn't really mean anything. It says many words in there. People who use many words when they pray. Basically, it literally means many words. That's what it means in Greek. And it means quantity over quality. Just kind of like if I could just say a lot, maybe it would mean a lot. And God's not all that concerned with that. Another thing that is really interesting is in the first half of this section, it's in singular. So it says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. It says, I say to you. It's all singular. But when it comes to the Lord's Prayer, it's all plural. Our Father, who art in heaven, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts. So the Lord's Prayer portion is actually all plural. So the dynamic here is really interesting, being that there's an invitation in the beginning to go into your room and to be alone, to pray in secret. And that's telling us something about God, that he's completely accessible. We don't need to be anywhere special, and he hears us just as we are. But then, when you get to the Lord's Prayer, it's all plural. And this is because prayer isn't just an individualistic thing. It's not a solitary thing necessarily. It is also a communal thing. It's meant to be done. God, we need our needs met. Will you help us? God, we need to be forgiven together. All of these things are meant to be in plural and in community. So this shows us that though we have private access to God, we are to be in community, in a community that prays together and for each other. Now it says, hallowed be your name. I know that's kind of like a really religious word that we don't use a ton. It just means to treat God as holy, to treat God as set apart, that God is central and important, that he's great and good. So you might need to help your friends understand what the word hallowed means. We just don't use that word anymore. When it talks about daily bread, give us today our daily bread. Culturally, it'd be really important to know, and you may or may not need to say this, but I think it's important I want to share it with you, is give us today our daily bread. In Jesus' culture at that time, people would have been effectively getting their paid at the end of every day. And another way to put that is the majority of people, especially those that Jesus was speaking to in person, were day laborers. We have a lot of day laborers actually in my community, and they're counting on their funds to come in at the end of the day after a hard day's work. And so there is this idea of daily dependence that to be honest, a lot of Americans don't understand, but a lot of people in the broader world in different cultures understand. They're living day to day or maybe perhaps week to week in a way that many of us who have a lot of financial security can't identify with. So when they say, give us today our daily bread, that's something that's going on there. And one last thing, and then I'll move on to my illustration, which is when it talks about debts, forgive us our debts as we forgive those, as we forgive our debtors. But technically, it has nothing to do with money. When we think about debts, we think about money. But in this case, it's clear that Matthew is using debt and Jesus is using debt as a metaphor. God doesn't need any money. There's no reason that forgive us our debts. We do not have a bank account with God. He does not need us to transfer him, $10 on PayPal or anything like that. It's a metaphor for us needing to be forgiven in a right relationship with God. All right, 2 illustrations, and then I'll be out. First off, when coming back to the idea of a hypocrite, I'm planning on using this tomorrow night. I hope Lord uses it. And this is going to look super weird. I'm going to look like a Jabberwocky or something like that. But I'm going to use one of these, okay? When I talk about hypocrite, it says, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who stand out, when you pray, do not like the hypocrites. They love to stand and pray in the synagogues, the street corners, to be seen by others. So I'm just going to talk about what a hypocrite is, which is, it's me. And so I bought this little mask on Amazon. It was only a couple dollars. And I'm just going to kind of say this is what people would do when they would act. When they were going to be in a play, if they're going to be in a drama back in Jesus' day, they would literally, put this on. And what it was you were trying to be someone as an actor that you weren't, that you aren't. And as much as we try to be this with our friends or perhaps even with God, He's more interested with this. He wants to have a genuine relationship that I'm going to pray about and think about it, but I'm going to write some things. Here's a lot of things that I try to be. I try to be smart. I try to be well known. I try to be, well spoken. I try to have a lot of, be like more popular than, I try to do things. And I'm going to write all those on here, and I'm just going to put this on front of my face and say, you are probably like me. And in fact, Jesus even knows that. And what he's interested is not this. He's interested in the real you. And so I just am hoping for the kids that are in the back, they're looking at their cell phone, they're going to say, why the heck does Sean have that crazy Jabberwocky, freaky looking mask? I mean, it is freaky. I mean, I'm scared looking at myself. So, and then the last thing is that I think it would be cool to invite people to pray. Say, hey, for some of you do this often. For some of you, you've maybe never done this before. So even though it doesn't really sound like an illustration as such, it's interactive, and I think it would be engaging. It says, I want to invite you to pray. I'm going to give us 30 seconds of silence, and I want you to be real. I don't want you to think about your mask or whatever silently. I want you to use your real words. God knows who you are, and say a prayer. So give them a little bit of space to do that. And then I'd say maybe perhaps close with the Lord's Prayer. Jesus instructed us to use it, and may as well invite them into that. And if you want to go a step further, you might say, hey, the next time you get alone, whether it's in your car or maybe tonight when you put your head down, I encourage you to say a prayer, an honest prayer about where you're at. So those are some ideas. I know I'm doing the club talk tomorrow night. Pray for me if you get this. But otherwise, I will also try to get these Talk Tuesdays going out a little bit more timely. I'm just in crunch time with a lot of things right now related to too many books and silly things I'm trying to do. So I will talk to you later, and thanks for watching.